In the heart of Maplewood, a quiet town surrounded by rolling hills and towering pine trees, the courthouse stood like an old sentinel. Its worn stone walls and ancient wooden benches witnessed years of countless cases, from minor infractions to life-changing trials. The room felt imposing to most, and it was especially daunting for Ella Thompson, a single mother of 3, as she sat, waiting her turn to appear before the judge. Her youngest, Riley, clung to her hand, her tiny fingers cold yet secure in her mother's grip. Today's hearing wasn't for any crime of high stakes, at least not to the outside world. Ella had been cited for a parking violation, a $250 fine. To some, it might have seemed inconsequential, but for Ella, who worked multiple jobs just to keep her small family afloat, it was more than she could bear. The fine had arrived like an unwelcome guest at the end of a grueling week, adding to a list of expenses she could hardly manage. She was here, hoping the judge would show her a shred of understanding. "Court is now in session," the bailiff called, and all heads turned toward the tall, imposing figure of Judge Frank Howard as he entered. Known for his no-nonsense rulings and serious demeanor, Judge Howard's reputation preceded him, filling Ella with a mixture of hope and dread. She was praying he'd listen to her, that he might see her as more than a case number on his docket. As Judge Howard took his seat, the air grew still, the soft shuffling of papers and the occasional cough the only sounds punctuating the silence. One by one, cases were called, and one by one, sentences and fines were handed down with swift decisiveness. When her name was finally called, Ella swallowed her anxiety, nudged Riley to her feet, and made her way to the front. "Ms. Thompson," Judge Howard's voice rang out, steady and clear. "You're here regarding a parking citation?" "Yes, Your Honor," Ella replied, trying to steady her voice. She felt her palms sweating, Riley's small hand gripping hers as they faced the judge. The judge adjusted his glasses, glancing at the case file before him. The record shows an unpaid fine of $250 for parking in a restricted area. Any reason you feel this should be waived? The question seemed simple enough, but Ella's heart raced. How could she explain her reasons without sounding like she was simply making excuses? She was about to respond when Riley, her 5-year-old daughter, looked up at the judge and innocently said, "Mommy, can we get food soon? I'm hungry." A collective murmur spread through the courtroom. Ella felt her face flush with embarrassment as she gently shushed Riley, apologizing under her breath. This was not how she had envisioned her hearing going. Riley's timing couldn't have been worse, and Ella braced herself for Judge Howard's reaction. However, instead of looking annoyed, the judge's face softened momentarily as he considered the little girl. A rare, almost hidden smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Order, please," he announced, raising a hand to silence the whispers, and then he looked at Riley. "Little one, are you hungry?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. Riley nodded, her wide eyes meeting his. "Yes, sir," she replied simply, her voice carrying a hint of hope. "We didn't eat breakfast." Judge Howard shifted his gaze to Ella, studying her with a bit more interest. Ella's cheeks burned with embarrassment, and she whispered an apology, explaining softly, "I'm sorry, Your Honor. We were in such a hurry to get here on time that I couldn't stop to get her anything." The judge nodded, his expression turning thoughtful as he looked back at Riley. There was a brief pause as he seemed to weigh his next words. Finally, he addressed Ella, his voice steady but not unkind. "Ms. Thompson, I'll give you a moment," he said. Then, unexpectedly, he leaned forward, his gaze resting on Riley once again. "Young lady, would you like to tell me why you're here with your mom today?" Riley looked up at her mother, her expression innocent and sincere. Ella felt her stomach tighten, fearing that her daughter's honest reply would only deepen their plight. But Riley, in her usual forthright way, spoke up without hesitation. "We came here because Mommy doesn't have enough money," she explained, her small voice echoing in the quiet courtroom. "She works a lot, but sometimes we still can't get everything." Ella's throat tightened as she fought back tears. Her daughter's words cut through the air, stark and simple. She had spent so long trying to protect her children from the harsh realities of their lives. But here, in front of strangers, her youngest was laying it all bare. Judge Howard's face remained impassive, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Perhaps understanding. Perhaps sympathy. He sat back, folding his hands as he contemplated her response, his gaze shifting between mother and daughter. The silence in the courtroom felt heavy as the judge continued to consider them. Finally, he spoke, his voice thoughtful. "Ms. Thompson," he said slowly, "I understand that life is challenging. Can you tell me a bit more about your circumstances? How did this parking citation come to be?" Ella nodded, her voice barely a whisper as she tried to explain. "I'm a waitress, Your Honor. I work at a small cafe in town, and I also take on some cleaning jobs. That day, Riley was sick, and I needed to get her medicine. The pharmacy was busy, and I parked. Well, I parked where I shouldn't have." She took a breath, collecting herself, then continued. "I was just trying to get in and out quickly. It was a mistake, and I didn't mean to break the rules, but I just didn't have anywhere else to go." Judge Howard listened without interrupting, his gaze steady as she spoke. Ella felt the weight of his scrutiny, yet there was something in his eyes that encouraged her to continue, to speak freely. "When I got the ticket, I couldn't pay it right away," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I tried to save up, but with bills, rent, and everything else, I just couldn't manage it. That's why I'm here today, hoping for some understanding." The judge didn't respond right away, letting the silence settle between them. Ella's pulse throbbed in her ears as she waited for his verdict, knowing she had laid everything on the line. She knew he could dismiss her plea, enforce the fine, and go on with his day without a second thought. After all, she was just another case file, a minor inconvenience in a system that seldom made exceptions. But as Judge Howard looked at Riley once more, his expression softened almost imperceptibly. He seemed to be wrestling with something, perhaps his own set of rules and the person he saw standing before him. Finally, he leaned forward, clearing his throat as he spoke. "Ms. Thompson," he said, his tone a little lighter, "while I am here to enforce the law, I am not without compassion. The law exists to serve the community, not to punish it unfairly." Ella held her breath, her heart pounding as he continued. "I will dismiss the citation on the condition that you promise to avoid any restricted parking in the future," he said, a small smile appearing on his usually stoic face. A wave of relief washed over Ella, and she managed a grateful nod, her voice trembling as she thanked him. Judge Howard wasn't finished, though. With a thoughtful expression, he glanced at the bailiff and whispered something. The bailiff nodded and left the room, returning moments later with a brown paper bag. Judge Howard handed it to Riley, his serious face relaxing into a gentle smile. "Here you go, young lady," he said. "I believe you mentioned you were hungry." Riley's eyes lit up as she took the bag, glancing at her mother for permission. Ella, still reeling from the judge's decision, nodded, her own smile breaking through the tears that had been threatening to fall. "Thank you, Your Honor," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. The gesture was small, yet it meant the world to her and her daughter. Judge Howard nodded, then leaned back in his chair, his expression returning to its usual stoicism as he tapped his gavel. "Case dismissed," he announced, signaling the end of their ordeal. As they left the courtroom, Ella felt a surge of gratitude for the unexpected kindness she had received. Her heart felt lighter, and she couldn't help but feel that, for the first time in a long time, things might just be okay. The judge's empathy, shown in a moment that could have easily gone the other way, had given her the courage to continue forward. Leaving the courthouse, Ella felt as if the weight of the world had been lifted. Riley happily clutched the brown paper bag from the judge, and Ella couldn't stop smiling as she watched her daughter enjoy the small snack with wide-eyed wonder. For a fleeting moment, the reality of their challenges faded, and all that remained was gratitude and a sense of renewed hope. As they walked down the courthouse steps, Riley looked up at her mother with her innocent eyes. "Mommy, is the judge a good man?" she asked, her voice filled with curiosity. Ella paused, thinking about the question. "Yes, sweetheart," she replied, squeezing Riley's hand. "Sometimes people surprise you with kindness." But as they headed back to their small rented apartment, Ella's mind began to wander back to the realities of her life. The struggle to make ends meet, the constant worry about providing for her children, and the weight of being their sole support. It all weighed heavily on her once more. That parking fine may have been dismissed, but her day-to-day battles were far from over. The following weeks brought a mix of relief and more challenges. Ella continued her work at the cafe and juggled cleaning jobs on the side. One morning, as she wiped down tables at the cafe, a woman walked in, observing her with a curious yet friendly smile. "Are you Ella Thompson?" the woman asked, her voice warm. Ella looked up, surprised. "Yes, that's me." The woman introduced herself as Maggie, a volunteer at a local community center. She explained that Judge Howard had recommended Ella to her, telling Maggie about Ella's hard work and dedication as a mother. He'd mentioned how much Ella was doing to keep her family together, despite the difficulties. "I run a program that offers childcare support and job training," Maggie continued, her voice full of enthusiasm. "We help single parents like yourself, and I think you'd be a great fit." Ella's heart swelled with hope and disbelief. Here was another helping hand, a small piece of hope that seemed to light the way forward. She hadn't expected anything more than the dismissal of her fine, but the judge's actions had opened a door she hadn't even known existed. Maggie handed Ella a brochure and details for an upcoming workshop, urging her to attend. That evening, as she put Riley and her siblings to bed, Ella's mind buzzed with possibilities. Maybe, just maybe, things were finally turning in her favor. She knew the road would still be long and hard, but the kindness of strangers had rekindled something inside her, a spark she hadn't felt in years. The day of the workshop arrived quickly, and Ella was both nervous and excited as she entered the community center. She was greeted warmly by other parents who shared stories of similar struggles and triumphs. The workshop covered a range of topics: financial literacy, budgeting, job skills, and career planning. Ella found herself soaking up every word, feeling as if she were finally gaining the tools she needed to build a better life for herself and her children. Over the next few months, Ella participated actively in the program, attending every session she could. She learned about local resources for affordable childcare, signed up for a subsidized housing program, and even found the courage to apply for a part-time administrative role at the community center. The support from Maggie and the other parents gave her confidence she hadn't felt in a long time. One afternoon, as she helped Riley with her schoolwork, Ella noticed a change in her daughter. Riley was happier, more vibrant, and seemed to sense the positive shift in their lives. The strain and worry that had once etched lines on Ella's face had softened, replaced by a glimmer of optimism. Riley noticed it too, and often hugged her mother, telling her, "You're the best, Mommy." Months later, Ella was officially offered the part-time position at the community center. It wasn't a high-paying job, but it was stable and allowed her to spend more time with her children. Her life was still far from perfect, but the stability brought a sense of relief and empowerment. For the first time, Ella could envision a future where she could give her children more than just the bare necessities. As her family's circumstances slowly improved, Ella often thought back to the moment in the courtroom. She realized that sometimes a single act of kindness can become the catalyst for life-changing events. That day, Judge Howard hadn't just dismissed a fine. He'd given her a second chance. And Ella, determined not to waste it, had embraced that chance wholeheartedly. One day, Judge Howard came by the community center during an open house event. Ella spotted him across the room and, feeling a surge of gratitude, walked over to him with Riley by her side. "Judge Howard," she said, her voice full of emotion. "I don't know if you remember me, but you changed my life. Thank you for everything." The judge looked at her, recognition dawning as he remembered the young mother and her daughter in the courtroom. "I'm glad to see you're doing well, Miss Thompson," he said, his usual sternness softened by a genuine smile. "You've done the hard work. I just gave you a nudge in the right direction." From that day on, Ella continued to work at the community center, dedicating her time to helping other parents who faced similar challenges. The journey hadn't been easy, and there were still struggles along the way, but she now had hope, support, and a growing sense of accomplishment. Her children saw a happier, more confident mother, and Riley often spoke with pride about the nice judge who had helped them. The small town of Maplewood buzzed with the story of Judge Howard's compassionate ruling, and soon, it spread even beyond the town's borders. People were inspired by his decision and the impact it had on Ella and her family. Stories of hope and resilience began to emerge, showing that even the smallest acts of kindness could change lives in ways no one could have predicted. Ella and her children had gained more than a reprieve from a parking fine. They had found community, opportunity, and a brighter future. And it all began in a courtroom, with a little girl's innocent request and a judge who chose compassion over mere rules.